Intelligence wins wars. This is one of history's most proven lessons. Commanders who listen to their intelligence officers, who carefully analyze enemy capabilities and intentions, who prepare for threats their spies warn about, these commanders win battles. But throughout the early 1940s, some of the most catastrophic military defeats happened not because intelligence was unavailable, but because commanders refused to believe it. This is the story of commanders who had the information they needed to avoid disaster, but chose to ignore it. They dismissed intelligence reports that contradicted their assumptions. They rejected warnings that challenged their plans. They convinced themselves that what they wanted to be true was more reliable than what their spies reported. And millions of people paid the price for this arrogance. Perhaps no commander ignored more intelligence more catastrophically than Joseph Stalin in the spring of 1941. Soviet intelligence services were among the world's best. They had agents throughout Europe, including deep inside the German government and military. And they all reported the same thing. Germany was preparing to invade the Soviet Union. Richard Sorge, a Soviet spy working in Japan, sent detailed warnings. He reported German troop concentrations on the Soviet border, the timing of the planned invasion, even the specific date. The British passed along intelligence from their ultra-decryption program. Soviet military intelligence gathered evidence of German preparations. Border units reported massive German force buildups just across the frontier. Stalin received over 80 separate intelligence warnings about the impending invasion. The evidence was overwhelming and consistent, but Stalin had convinced himself that Germany wouldn't attack. He believed Hitler would honor their non-aggression pact, at least until Germany finished with Britain. Any intelligence suggesting otherwise must be British provocation, trying to start a Soviet-German conflict. Stalin not only ignored the warnings, he punished those who delivered them. Intelligence officers who reported German preparations were accused of spreading panic or falling for enemy disinformation. Some were imprisoned or executed. This created a climate where intelligence officers learned to tell Stalin what he wanted to hear, rather than what evidence indicated. When Germany invaded on June 22, 1941, Soviet forces were caught completely unprepared despite months of warnings. Aircraft sat parked wingtip to wingtip on airfields, easy targets. Ammunition was stored far from frontline units. Officers were away on leave. The Soviet military was configured for peacetime because Stalin had ordered them not to take provocative defensive measures. The cost of Stalin's refusal to believe intelligence was catastrophic. In the first weeks, Germany captured or destroyed thousands of Soviet aircraft, tanks, and artillery pieces. Entire Soviet armies were encircled and destroyed. Over 3 million Soviet soldiers were captured in the first 6 months. Much of this disaster was avoidable if Stalin had believed his intelligence services and allowed proper defensive preparations. American commanders at Pearl Harbor had intelligence indicating that Japanese attack was possible, even likely. Yet when Japanese aircraft appeared over Oahu on the morning of December 7, 1941, they achieved complete surprise. This wasn't because intelligence was unavailable. It was because commanders didn't act on the warnings they received. American cryptographers had broken Japanese diplomatic codes. They could read messages between Tokyo and Japanese embassies. These messages showed clearly that Japan was preparing for military action and that diplomatic relations were deteriorating rapidly. Washington sent warnings to Pacific commands that hostile action was possible. Admiral Husband Kimmel, commanding the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, received warnings but didn't believe Pearl Harbor was seriously threatened. He thought the Philippines or Southeast Asia were more likely targets. His intelligence officer warned that Japanese carriers were unaccounted for, their location unknown. Kimmel dismissed this as unimportant. On the morning of December the 7th, American radar operators detected incoming aircraft over 130 miles away. They reported this contact to the information center. The officer on duty assumed these were American B-17 bombers expected from the mainland and told the operators not to worry about it. Nobody verified the identification. Nobody alerted defenses. Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor with devastating effect. 8 battleships were damaged or destroyed. Over 180 aircraft were destroyed, most on the ground. Nearly 2,500 Americans died. The attack succeeded partly because of Japanese tactical excellence, but also because American commanders ignored or dismissed multiple intelligence indicators that could have provided warning. The aircraft at Hickam Field and other bases were parked close together to prevent sabotage, the threat commanders worried about. This made them perfect targets for air attack, the threat intelligence had warned about. The disconnect between perceived threats and actual threats, between what commanders believed and what intelligence indicated, cost thousands of lives and nearly lost the Pacific. British commanders considered Singapore an impregnable fortress. Massive coastal guns protected the harbour. The naval base was strong. Jungle to the north was considered impassable for major military forces. British intelligence reported that Japanese were preparing to attack through the Malayan jungle, but commanders dismissed this as impossible. Lieutenant General Arthur Percival, commanding British forces in Malaya and Singapore, received intelligence about Japanese military preparations. Spies reported troop concentrations, landing craft being assembled, supply stockpiles building up. The pattern clearly indicated imminent invasion. Percival requested reinforcements and better defences. London sent limited help, believing Singapore's defences were adequate. British intelligence underestimated Japanese military capabilities. Reports described Japanese equipment as inferior and Japanese soldiers as poorly trained. This racial prejudice led commanders to dismiss warnings about Japanese strength. When Japan invaded Malaya in December 1941, British forces were shocked by Japanese tactical proficiency and rapid advance. Japanese forces advanced through supposedly impassable jungle, using bicycles to move quickly along roads and paths. They outflanked British defences, which faced the wrong direction, toward the sea rather than toward the jungle. Within weeks, Japanese forces reached Singapore itself. Percival had intelligence that Japanese forces were smaller than his garrison. His officers urged continuing resistance, but Percival feared civilian casualties and believed further fighting was futile. On February 15, 1942, he surrendered Singapore and 80,000 British, Indian and Australian troops, the largest surrender in British military history. The fall of Singapore was partly caused by commanders ignoring intelligence about Japanese capabilities and intentions. If British leadership had believed their spies' warnings, if they had taken Japanese military power seriously, if they had properly fortified against land attack, Singapore might have held. Instead, preconceptions and prejudice blinded commanders to reality until too late. Operation Market Garden in September 1944 was British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's plan to end the conflict by Christmas. Airborne forces would seize bridges in Holland, opening a corridor for armoured advance into Germany. It was bold, ambitious, and based on assumptions that intelligence contradicted. British intelligence gathered evidence that German forces in the Market Garden area were stronger than northern planning assumed. Dutch resistance reported SS Panzer divisions refitting near Arnhem, the furthest airborne objective. Aerial reconnaissance photographed tanks and armored vehicles. Intelligence officers warned that airborne troops might face unexpectedly strong opposition. Montgomery dismissed these warnings. He believed German forces were weak and demoralized, incapable of serious resistance. His intelligence chief, General Brian Urquhart, personally showed him aerial photographs of German tanks near Arnhem. Montgomery rejected the evidence, suggesting that Urquhart was exhausted and should take leave. The operation proceeded as planned. When British paratroopers landed at Arnhem, they found not weak, scattered German units, but SS Panzer divisions exactly where intelligence had warned. The lightly armed paratroopers faced tanks and experienced infantry. Instead of easy capture of the bridge, they fought a desperate battle against superior forces. The operation failed catastrophically. Of approximately 10,000 British paratroopers at Arnhem, only about 2,000 escaped. The rest were killed or captured. Montgomery's dismissal of intelligence warnings cost thousands of lives and delayed the Allied advance. The conflict wouldn't end by Christmas after all. Montgomery later defended his decision, arguing that the operation nearly succeeded and that the intelligence about German strength was exaggerated. But the evidence was clear before the operation. German forces were present in strength exactly where intelligence said they would be. Ignoring this intelligence because it contradicted operational planning was command failure. In December 1944, Allied intelligence detected signs of German preparations for a major offensive in the Ardennes region. Radio traffic increased. Captured documents mentioned offensive operations. Reconnaissance reported troop movements toward the Ardennes. Some intelligence officers concluded Germany was preparing a major attack. Allied commanders dismissed these warnings. They believed Germany lacked resources for major offensive operations. The Ardennes sector was quiet, defended by inexperienced or recuperating American divisions. Surely Germany wouldn't attack through difficult terrain in winter. Intelligence suggesting otherwise must be deceptive. German attempts to disguise defensive preparations as offensive threats. On December 16, 1944, Germany launched its largest offensive on the Western Front. Over 200,000 men, hundreds of tanks, attacking through the Ardennes exactly where intelligence had warned. American forces were caught by surprise. Entire divisions were surrounded. The offensive created a dangerous bulge in Allied lines. The initial German success was partly due to Allied commanders ignoring intelligence warnings. If Allied leadership had believed their intelligence officers, they could have reinforced the Ardennes sector, prepared stronger defences, and positioned reserves to counterattack. Instead, the sector was lightly held because commanders assumed attack there was impossible. Looking across these catastrophic intelligence failures, patterns emerge. Commanders ignored intelligence for consistent, predictable reasons. Understanding these patterns helps explain why smart, experienced military leaders made such costly mistakes. First, confirmation bias. Commanders believed what confirmed their existing assumptions and dismissed information that contradicted them. Stalin wanted to believe Hitler wouldn't attack, so he rejected evidence of German invasion preparations. Montgomery wanted to believe German forces were weak, so he dismissed evidence of panzer divisions at Arnhem. Second, wishful thinking. Commanders wanted certain things to be true and convinced themselves that evidence supported their wishes. Allied commanders before the Battle of the Bulge wanted to believe Germany was incapable of major offensives, so they interpreted ambiguous intelligence in ways that supported this belief. Third, institutional culture. Military organizations that punished bearers of bad news and rewarded optimistic assessments created incentives for intelligence officers to tell commanders what they wanted to hear. Stalin's purges taught Soviet intelligence officers that disagreeing with Stalin's assessment was dangerous. Fourth, cognitive dissonance. When intelligence contradicted plans already in motion, commanders found it psychologically easier to reject the intelligence than to change elaborate operational plans. Market Garden had months of planning invested. Accepting intelligence about German strength would mean cancelling or radically revising the operation. Fifth, overconfidence. Success breeds arrogance. British commanders underestimated Japanese capabilities, partly because of racist assumptions and partly because of overconfidence in British military superiority. American commanders at Pearl Harbor didn't believe Japan would dare attack because they overestimated American deterrent power. The consequences of ignored intelligence were measured in lives lost, battles defeated, strategic setbacks that prolonged conflicts and cost additional casualties. At Pearl Harbor, over 2,400 Americans died in an attack that intelligence could have warned against. At Singapore, 80,000 Allied troops surrendered in a defeat that intelligence indicated was coming. Operation Barbarossa's initial success, enabled by Stalin's rejection of warnings, led to millions of Soviet casualties in the first months of invasion. Entire armies were destroyed, millions of soldiers captured, vast territories occupied, all because Soviet forces weren't prepared for an attack their intelligence services had accurately predicted. The Battle of the Bulge cost approximately 90,000 American casualties, including 19,000 killed. Many of these casualties occurred in the operation's first days when surprised American units were overwhelmed. If intelligence warnings had been heeded and defenses strengthened, the initial German assault would have been far less effective. Market Garden cost 17,000 Allied casualties, including the destruction of the British 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem. These casualties were directly attributable to commanders ignoring intelligence about German strength. The operation's failure delayed Allied advance and prolonged the conflict in Western Europe. Beyond immediate battlefield casualties, ignored intelligence had strategic consequences. Singapore's fall gave Japan control of Southeast Asia and access to critical resources. Pearl Harbor eliminated American Pacific Fleet's battleship strength for months. The Battle of the Bulge delayed Allied advance into Germany by weeks. There were also opportunity costs. Resources devoted to failed operations could have been used elsewhere. The troops lost at Arnhem couldn't participate in subsequent operations. The aircraft destroyed at Pearl Harbor weren't available for the Pacific campaign. Ignored intelligence created cascading negative effects throughout military campaigns. Not all commanders ignored intelligence. Some listened to their intelligence officers, believed warning they received, and acted accordingly. These successes demonstrate what was possible when intelligence was properly valued. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was won partly because American commanders believed intelligence about Japanese plans. Cryptographers had partially broken Japanese naval codes and determined they knew that Japan was planning to attack Midway Island. American commanders accepted this intelligence despite its uncertainty and positioned carrier forces to ambush the Japanese fleet. When Japanese carriers arrived at Midway, expecting surprise, they instead encountered American carriers waiting in ambush. The resulting battle destroyed 4 Japanese carriers and shifted the Pacific naval balance. This victory happened because American commanders trusted their intelligence services and acted on partially certain information. British intelligence provided detailed warnings about German V-weapon programs, the V-1 flying bomb and V-2 rocket. Despite skepticism about reports of German rocket development, British leadership eventually believed the intelligence and devoted resources to attacking V-weapon production and launch sites. This effort, though imperfect, reduced the scale of V-weapon attacks on Britain. Soviet intelligence accurately predicted Japanese intentions not to attack the Soviet Union after 1941. This allowed Stalin to transfer Siberian divisions to the European front, where they participated in the defense of Moscow. Believing this intelligence about Japanese intentions enabled crucial strategic redeployment. Allied intelligence services accurately tracked German submarine movements through signals, intelligence, and direction finding. When commanders believed this intelligence and routed convoys accordingly, losses decreased. When commanders dismissed intelligence as unreliable and followed standard routes, losses increased. The correlation was clear and eventually led to systematic use of intelligence for convoy routing. Behind every intelligence success and failure were professional intelligence officers gathering information, analyzing data, and delivering assessments to commanders. These professionals often correctly assessed enemy intentions and capabilities, only to watch commanders ignore their work. British cryptographers at Bletchley Park broke German Enigma codes, providing unprecedented access to German communications. The intelligence they produced, codenamed Ultra, was extraordinarily valuable. But Ultra was only useful when commanders believed and acted on it. Some commanders trusted Ultra implicitly. Others dismissed it when it contradicted their assumptions. Soviet intelligence officers who warned Stalin about German invasion preparations faced impossible situations. They had accurate intelligence but knew that delivering assessments Stalin didn't want to hear could cost them their lives. Several intelligence officers were executed for reporting information that contradicted Stalin's beliefs. This created systemic failure where accurate intelligence couldn't reach decision-makers. American intelligence officers before Pearl Harbor faced bureaucratic obstacles and command indifference. They collected evidence of Japanese preparations but lacked authority to order defensive measures. They could warn but not act. Their warnings were noted but not acted upon with urgency. Dutch resistance intelligence officers who reported German armor near Arnhem risked their lives to gather and transmit information. They accurately assessed German strength and composition, yet their intelligence was dismissed by commanders who preferred to believe German forces were weak. The resistance members faced danger to provide intelligence that was ultimately ignored. Intelligence professionals learned painful lessons from these failures. They developed better methods for presenting assessments, for distinguishing certain from uncertain information, for communicating confidence levels in their conclusions. They learned to provide context and evidence, not just conclusions, giving commanders information needed to make informed decisions. The catastrophic intelligence failures of the early 1940s led to institutional reforms in how intelligence was collected, analyzed, and presented to decision-makers. These reforms aim to prevent commanders from easily dismissing inconvenient intelligence. Intelligence analysis became more rigorous and structured. Analysts were trained to separate evidence from assumption, to identify gaps in knowledge, to present alternative interpretations of ambiguous data. This helped commanders understand the basis for intelligence assessments and the degree of certainty involved. Intelligence products were standardized with clear confidence levels. Assessments identified which conclusions were certain, probable, or possible. This allowed commanders to judge the reliability of intelligence and make risk-adjusted decisions. It became harder to dismiss intelligence without engaging with the evidence behind it. Red teaming and alternative analysis became standard practice. Intelligence organizations created teams tasked with challenging consensus assessments, with developing alternative interpretations of evidence. This helped identify when analysis was being skewed by confirmation bias or groupthink. Intelligence oversight improved. senior intelligence officers gained more authority to insist that commanders receive certain intelligence even if they didn't want it. Channels were created for intelligence professionals to escalate concerns if they believed commanders were ignoring critical warnings. Cultural changes emphasized that intelligence officers should deliver accurate assessments regardless of whether commanders wanted to hear them. Organizations tried to create environments where bad news could be delivered without punishment, where challenging commanders' assumptions was seen as professional duty rather than insubordination. The commanders who ignored intelligence and paid terrible prices teach enduring lessons. Intelligence is worthless if decision-makers don't believe it. The best intelligence services in the world cannot prevent disasters if commanders reject information that contradicts their assumptions or preferences. Successful commanders listen to intelligence even when it's inconvenient. They adjust plans based on new information. They recognize that wishful thinking is dangerous and that uncomfortable truths must be confronted. They create environments where intelligence officers can deliver bad news without fear of punishment. The modern world still sees commanders ignoring intelligence. Political leaders dismiss intelligence assessments that contradict their policies. Military commanders reject warnings that challenge their operational plans. The cognitive biases that caused intelligence failures in the 1940s remain present in human psychology. But awareness of historical failures provides defense against repeating them. Understanding how confirmation bias, wishful thinking, and overconfidence led previous commanders to disaster helps modern decision-makers recognize these patterns in themselves. The catastrophes at Pearl Harbor, Singapore, Arnhem, and in the Soviet Union in 1941 stand as warnings about the cost of ignoring intelligence. Intelligence wins wars, but only if commanders listen to it. The millions who died because their commanders ignored warnings deserve to be remembered. Their sacrifice teaches that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one across the battlefield. It's the one in the mirror. The commander too proud or too stubborn to believe intelligence that contradicts their assumptions.